I want to thank you all for joining us today. I am here in greater Minneapolis-St. Paul, and I am optimistic that we are going to put an end to this waste, fraud, and abuse, that we are going to have recoveries for the American people, and that we are going to hold people accountable, set an example, and make sure that federal aid gets to the people it was intended for and not to these fraudsters. Minneapolis and St. Paul, like many communities, has suffered for years from the egregious negligence of the radical left's rule. President Trump is committed to restoring accountability to put Minnesota back on the right track. Under President Trump's leadership, the entire administration is focused on delivering results for the American people. Our citizens have a right to know that their tax dollars are not being diverted to fund acts of global terror or to fund luxury cars for fraudsters. Democratic Governor Tim Walz has allowed welfare programs and fraud to spiral out of control. Billions of dollars intended for hungry children, housing for disabled seniors, and services for children with special needs were diverted to people who cheated the system, some of whom are not even American citizens. At Treasury, we are thoroughly investigating the fraud, including funds sent to Somalia through money service businesses, which provide financial services outside of a formal bank. These funds could have potentially been diverted to the terrorist organization Al-Shabaab. We have traced where the money went and are examining it. Treasury's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, known as FinCEN, along with the IRS, are leading our investigation to examine whether financial institutions have complied with their legal obligations under the Bank Secrecy Act and Treasury's regulations. These requirements are designed to detect money laundering and other illicit activity, counter the financing of terrorism, and safeguard the United States financial system from abuse. Earlier this morning, I met with several financial institutions and made clear we must do more to safeguard our nation from waste, fraud, and abuse. The time has come for accountability. President Trump wants accountability. I want accountability. The American people want accountability, and they will get accountability. That is why I'm announcing several initiatives Treasury is taking to target fraud here in Minnesota. And the Minnesota protocols will serve as a genesis and a launching pad for investigations into other states. First, we have followed the money and identified the money service businesses that may have transferred taxpayer funds overseas. Our team at FinCEN has just provided formal notification to these businesses that they are under investigation. These businesses had an obligation to comply with anti-money laundering laws, and they will be held responsible for any crimes they committed. FinCEN has also issued a geographic targeting order for Hennepin and Ramsey counties that require banks and money transmitters to report additional information about funds transferred outside of the United States. This will put a microscope on these businesses, advance prosecutions, and assist in the recovery of funds laundered internationally. Fraudsters in Minnesota stole at least $300 million meant for children in need, and we must prevent fraud of this scale from occurring in the future. Accordingly, FinCEN today issued an alert to financial institutions that will help them identify and report specific warning signs of fraud in federal child nutrition programs. Fraud must be stamped out early, and this alert will help law enforcement do just that. Our investigators at IRS-CI have played a critical role in uncovering fraud, and the role of the IRS in these investigations will continue. I am pleased to announce that IRS Civil Enforcement is auditing financial institutions that facilitated the laundering of Minnesota funds, in addition to helping support criminal and civil enforcement efforts. The IRS will also soon announce the formation of a task force to investigate any fraud and abuse involving pandemic-era tax incentives and misuse of 501c3 tax-exempt status by entities implicated in the Minnesota-based social services fraud schemes. We are committed to preventing fraud and fraudulent nonprofits from taking advantage of the American taxpayer. Lastly, Treasury is providing training to Minnesota law enforcement on how to utilize financial data, such as suspicious activity reports, to better combat these fraud schemes. We will not let the incompetence and recalcitrance of Governor Walz stop law enforcement from holding these perpetrators accountable. President Trump is dedicated to ensuring honest Minnesotans are not cheated and their hard-earned tax dollars are not being abused. Treasury will deploy all tools to bring an end to this egregious, unchecked fraud and hold perpetrators to account. We look forward to sharing our findings and keeping you all updated. Now I will turn it back over to my team, and I will take some questions from the press. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary. We have time for a few questions from reporters. If you would like to ask a question, please use the raise your hand function on Zoom. Thank you. I see our first question will go to Mary Margaret with the Daily Wire. Mary Margaret, please ask your question.
Thank you, Secretary Bessent. I wanted to ask if you could share what role Governor Tim Walz played in any of this, if any, and whether you have any indication that he won't seek re-election because of anything that you may have uncovered so far. Thank you.
I can't talk about ongoing investigations. It's clear that Governor Walz has been negligent in his fiduciary duties as the chief executive of the state of Minnesota, that this would happen on his watch, and we are actively pursuing all leads to see the level of involvement, whether it's limited to just negligence and incompetence or is something more than that.
Thank you. I see Fatima with the Associated Press has a question. Fatima, please ask your question.
Hi, thank you, Secretary Bessent, for taking questions on this issue. I have a question related to the task force. Does Treasury plan to work with the Justice Department on this new division for fraud enforcement that was announced yesterday? How are you working to ensure that some of these functions that are all being announced related to the fraud aren't duplicative?
Oh, well, I think the better question is, how did these things slip through the safety protocols, the financial safety protocols that we had in place? So if for a while we have duplicative processes that stop this and bring this to heel, because, and again, this is a larger scandal than Minnesota, then it is all hands on deck. Once we get the huge amount of fraud under control, then we can worry about streamlining the procedures. But as I said, President Trump has instructed several agencies in his administration, led by this new Assistant Attorney General, to end this fraud and recover funds for the American taxpayer.
Thank you. I see Claire Jones with the Financial Times has a question. Claire Jones, please ask your question.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for the opportunity to ask the question and for making time to do this today. You mentioned at the Economic Club of Minnesota yesterday that this is costing U.S. taxpayers $600 billion in fraud. What's your kind of baseline targets for how much you expect to recover with the sorts of measures that you've announced today? And do you have any sorts of timeline to really close this rather substantial gap in what the US taxpayer should ought to be receiving?
Well, again, because of the gross incompetence by the Waltz administration and the lack of leadership, we are just putting all that together now. But as I just said to the previous question, all entities in the administration will be pursuing this so that we can get the biggest recoveries possible, and we will see. And we are going to leave no stone unturned, whether it was fraudulent real estate, whether it is money that has been wired overseas. We will be tracking it to the Middle East and East Africa. This is why Treasury is involved. This is what we do. We track, we follow the money, and we intend to follow it as much as we can, prosecute the individuals no matter where they are, whether they are in the Minnesota government or they are sitting in East Africa. We will find them.
Thank you. And I see Richard Escobedo with CBS has a question. Richard, please state your question.
Thank you, Spencer, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for doing this morning. I have two questions. I'm wondering if you can explain or elaborate on whether or not you've found any evidence that indicates taxpayer dollars have flowed directly to terrorist organizations, and then I do have a follow-up after that.
Given the geographic proximity and the wires to East Africa, we are in the middle of investigations, and what we have found is highly concerning. I cannot talk about ongoing investigations, but think of the absurdity. Think of the absurdity of money being wired from Minnesota by these individuals that could have come from government programs or from excess benefits. This should not be wired out of the country, and we are going to be cracking down on that.
And then my second question is, you said on Fox last night that as a part of this geographical targeting order, the threshold for surveillance is being lowered to $3,000. Do you anticipate that will be lowered that will also be expanded into other states, that lowered threshold? Do you have any sense on what other states you anticipate having to do this in?
So we have lowered it's called a geographical targeting order, the GTOs. We have used lower thresholds to get at the cartels along the U.S.-Mexico border. And we view this crime as very similar to the cartels' money laundering, many of the same approaches, many of the same shell companies. So we will see where it goes out from here. That will be a starting point. And as I said, Minnesota is going to be the protocols, the procedures, and the investigative techniques, as well as the collaboration with other agencies. Minnesota is going to be the genesis for a national rollout.
Thank you.
Thank you. And it looks like we have time for one more question, and that will go to Alana Austin with Newsmax.
Hi, good morning. Thank you so much, Secretary Bessent, for your time. I was wondering if there are any specific financial institutions that you think had lax practices that you're willing to name at this time. And also, I'm trying to understand if Somali government officials actually directed individuals from the country to come to Minnesota to exploit vulnerable systems, or whether you think that the bad actors were acting on their own.
So with the first question, as I said, we have targeted enhanced investigations for MSBs, money service businesses, in greater Minneapolis, St. Paul. As they are under investigation, I cannot name those businesses. We will make the details of the investigation available as they as we gather further information. And your last question is an excellent one, that we do not know the depth, breadth, and collusion in this financial calamity that Governor Waltz has allowed to have happen. That was this directed from overseas? Is it an endogenous flourishing of these fraudsters that Governor Walz allowed to grow right here in the backyard and take advantage of hardworking people of Minnesota, we'll see. So we are going to track this everywhere from top to bottom, and we will get to the bottom of it. And as we have more details, we will make those available.
And that's all the time we have. Thank you all so much for joining. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and that's all the time we have.